workshop is delivered in the context of the Social Sciences and Humanities Open Cloud project, in short, SHOC project. And the project, the SHOC project itself, is to create the Social Sciences and Humanities part of the European Open Science Cloud. And it does it by maximizing reuse through open science and FAIR principles, as well as interconnecting existing and new or emerging research infrastructures. And of course, it also works on the governance and sustainability of the social sciences and humanities part of the EOSC ecosystem that will be delivered within the project by the project. The project itself is a research and innovation action funded under Horizon 2020 framework with 47 partners, including linked third parties, and it has around 40 million euro budget. And the duration is 40 months, and we currently are in the middle of the project, more or less. So now, how does the SHOC project relate to the CoreTrustSeal? Well, in the project, we have a work package on governance, sustainability, and quality assurance, where we have a specific task which is executed on trust and quality assurance. It is task 8.2. So trust and quality assurance of data and data repositories. And in this task, we conduct training and outreach activities like this workshop, for instance, related to CoreTrustSeal. And we also have a support program for repositories that want to conduct CoreTrustSeal self-assessment or want to obtain CoreTrustSeal certificate. And currently in the program, we have 14 repositories selected. And now, how does the CoreTrustSeal relate to scholarly primitives, which is the main theme of the DARIAH annual event, virtual event? So as you know, scholarly primitives like representing or discovery are well supported by repositories or data repositories. But the question is, how can the users of those repositories be assured that the data provided by the repository is sustainable and the repository is reliable? Or on the other hand, how can you as repository owner or manager demonstrate trustworthiness of your repository? So one of the answers is to follow agreed basic rules, such as those defined by the CoreTrustSeal, and demonstrate this trustworthiness by relevant certificates, for example, like the CoreTrustSeal certificate. And this is why today we will share with you information on CoreTrustSeal to give you an overview and idea behind it. And that's all from my side. Now I will pass the screen to René, and he will run a Mentimeter exercise, and then after that he will present a short introduction to CoreTrustSeal.
In this slide you see this CoreTrustSeal logo, and that's where it's all about. So the idea is that when a repository goes through a certification process successfully, this seal can be used in your outings to customers or users of your data. So it gives you the it gives you ability to show the outside world that you went through this certification process. I think these cartoons very well explain the incentive for repository certification. I'm sorry if some of you saw them over and over again, or some of you must see them, probably also see them for the first time. They were created at a plenary of the Research Data Alliance. And I think the first one very well shows that if you, well, in research, of course, the publication is key, but of course the data should not be in a bin, in the dustbin. It should be in a proper storage space. Well, that is certified and has quality. And if you do not very well document your data, that's the second one. It's of course, you don't know what it is. In the future, nobody can use the data. And also where data sharing and economics, the funding of research, that in which you could say it's public money, so the data that should be made available for a secondary analysis in the future, or checking research. Okay, so I think these cartoons very well explain the rationale for having a high quality repository. But the next question, of course, what are the requirements for such a repository? And I'm glad in the Mentimeter you already gave a lot of suggestions, like it should be trustworthy, it should be sustainable, it has to do with policy, with interoperability, it should be inexpensive, that's also mentioned, and all kinds of other requirements. So the next slide is a little bit intimidating, if you because it, oh wait a minute, it on one slide you see the 16 requirements, and we do not have the time to go through all of them. It's also very boring, of course, and it takes a long time. But I will give you some information sources where you can go through if you would like to get more information. So we think, of the people of the CoreTrustSeal think that there are 3 categories of information that should be assessed by a repository. One has to do with how the repository is organized, that's the red pillar. It has to do with the digital objects that are managed, that's the orange pillar. And it has to do with the technology, the yellow one. And concerning the organization infrastructure, it has to do with what is your mission. You have to think about licenses. Requirement 3 has to do with continuity of access. What will happen if your funding stops, or for one, or what will happen with the repository if in the future, if there is a situation like that? How do you protect your data concerning concerning privacy, for instance? How is your organization organized? Is it related to a university, or is it for the whole, or you serve the whole country? How do you guide your experts? That's the last requirement. And then there is the next pillar is on digital object management, has to do with integrity. How are you sure that your data is not it stays authentic? How you appraise the data objects? How you document the storage procedures? What is your preservation plan for the long term? How do you guarantee data quality? Something on workflows, data discovery, identification. And then there is also 2 requirements that have to do with technology, the infrastructure, and security. And the idea is that for every requirement you get in the review process some guidelines, and that you do an assessment. So there is so you say, well, I have this requirement that my repository is not implemented, or we start thinking about it, or there are 4 levels, or we have implemented it but it's not mature, and then there is 4. Then you have the highest support achievable. So the idea is that you do an assessment of each of these requirements, and you say for your organization the maturity level of each requirement. And then this is the process. So to achieve a CoreTrustSeal, you apply, and then there is now an administration fee of €1,000 to get started with this process. cover the costs for the procedure. In a sense, there is a pool of reviewers that are available to do the review, and that is more or less on a voluntarily base. But you see, some of these reviewers are related with EOS projects, so it's a little bit a peer-to-peer process. It's not done by independent external reviewers. So it's a pool of peers and volunteers. So they do the peer review, and then the board of the CoreTrustSeal reviews this peer outcome, and then it's possible that the revisions are requested, and then you have to adjust your assignment, and then after it takes about it takes about 6 months or so in average, this process, and then the board will give you this CoreTrustSeal application, and then it will be okay. Now I'm not sure, it's valid for 3 years or 3 years, or 2. Now I'm not sure what I'm saying. It's 2 or 3 years, and that's the process. And so 16 requirements, process, and on this slide you can go see some information resources when you get more information. The first information resource is a webinar that we organized with SHOC in April, and it is recorded, and it has more details on the CoreTrustSeal. And this webinar was intended for repositories to attend, and then they could ask for SHOC support in the CoreTrustSeal certification. And that is already mentioned by Thomas. 14 repositories applied for this. And the webinar that was preparing that is in this slide. And the second slide is a catchy movie of 2 minutes that is on YouTube, and it's all and on the screen dump you see the logos of the 16 requirements. That's another way of communicating the quality requirements of the CoreTrustSeal.
There's a lot of talk about another buzzword nowadays, and that's fair data. And we thought it might be a good opportunity to also see the relations with certification and fair data, how they relate, because they are sort of a coin with 2 faces. One is the certification and trustworthy repository that produces and manages the fair data objects. So they are mentioned in the FAIR, all the text about FAIR, and the main objective of a certified or trusted digital repository is to produce fair data for its designated community. I mean, the group of researchers or research they support, because this is also highly linked with both FAIR and the questions, the requirements you find in the certification. So the thing we do in the repository is to produce fair data since a long time ago, and also keep it fair over time. So these squares represent the 4 different things that's included in FAIR. And as you see, if you compare them, at least with the other, what you saw René talking about, so is it this is the thing you actually need to be able to use the data in now and in the future, and it should be, as it says in the accessibility square, that it should be deposited in a trusted repository. There can be trusted repositories without certification, of course, but it's a how do you demonstrate if you are trusted if you don't sort of have a certification? I think most of you, when you repair your car or something, find a workshop that actually is familiar with or certified to work on your car. Or if you search a doctor, you search a doctor that's certified in taking action against the remedy you might have. So this is, I mean, even bakeries and butchers and stuff have their certification on the wall, so you could see they demonstrate that they know what they're doing. And that's what we're doing with certification as well. The fair data object is how we can illustrate the thing we are working in. So the blue center is the digital object itself, and it could consist of social science studies with hundreds of variables and a lot of metadata and stuff, or it could be just a measurement from an instrument. That doesn't mean anything in this context. So this takes out differences between disciplines and data types when we talk about fair data. So the content could be actually the same regardless of the content. And here you also see the most important thing of all in the fair object, and it's the identifier. Without the PID, a persistence identifier that identifies this object clearly and over time, so it can be retrieved, is not considered fair at all. PIDs, I suppose you understand. Persistency is in the identifier, so even if you move location, you could redirect the identifier you set on a data set or something else to point at the right place where it exists. It started back in the end of the 90s when all these 404 pages, or this page not found, were coming to be more and more common when you looked for a resource someone had reference to. So this really has helped both data managers and also those who run the web services and stuff to relocate their hardware and stuff in new domains and other, and still have the resources left there without changing all addresses in the links that they have sent out to others. So this PID should always be resolvable, even if the data set is gone or something. That it should be explained when you press a link that contains that PID. You could say also that the PID is it's a citation for machines. So we read the normal textual reference to a source, but this helps the machine to read and find the resource on its own. So it's also a step to make your citations machine actionable, which is more and more important. Fair is one of the big European projects that looking into data objects and how to include them in the EOSC, and they have, along with others, some of the organizations are named here, put out sort of rules and things how to make your data and metadata machine, both machine readable and machine actionable. So the, say a robot or something can search for data and find data for you among the vast resources that's out there now. So we have to agree on some keywords that go into the heads of web pages and others that allow the machines to interpret the content of the object you're looking for. Here are some of them. You can of course follow this in the presentations afterwards, because these will be out for you. But there's quite a lot of work going into this to find how should we make it easy for the machine to find it. And I mean, we humans can always find it, but we are not as strict in our thinking, so to say, as a machine. If we look here and compare these squares with the 16 requirements René presented, you could sort of find them, find a place for a requirement and fill up this as well. So if you go ahead with the CoreTrustSeal and you find that you also comply with all the necessary things in the fair world, if I say so. Another thing that's important in our world is the OAS model. I suppose this is the core thing for every repository. It goes back to the 90s, really. This is the top level of the model. And to simplify it, we can say that the CoreTrustSeal work is in the square in the middle, the gray pinkish one. Fair and fair things are at the right. It's the interactivities with consumers, the way you package and present your data in a fair way. And I put in a symbolic timeline, the blue arrow at the bottom. It reminds us about this is not a static thing. What's fair today is not fair in 10 years, and how you preserve and store your data will also change. Software access possibilities and other things will also change over time. So it's a constant preservation planning. That's the top pink square inside. That you have to have a plan how you change your resources to adapt to what happens outside the square. So it's sort of being a guard dog for following the development of the world outside. Today we use bits, but tomorrow it might be qubits for instead of, yeah, it's a lot of change going on at least. I think this sentence from the OAS model says it all, that the information preserved is independently understandable to the designated community. And if we go back to the round data, fair data object, this is sort of what it talks about. That round ball or object should over time be enough for a researcher in the future to use it. There will be no assistance, as it says, of those who created it once in the time. So you have to change the content of that fair data object to fit the time you live in. This is the way we interact with both the CoreTrustSeal trusted environment and the fair data and fair data objects. That was my...
Yeah, so hello, good afternoon. My name is Daan Broeder. I'm affiliated with the CLARION, and this is a DARIAH event, so there must be some of you that know what is CLARION. There might even be some double agent in the audience, but maybe I'll explain about CLARION. So CLARION is the research infrastructure for language resources and language technology. The idea is that, the mission statement is that it wants to create and maintain an infrastructure to support the sharing, use, and sustainability of language, data, and tools for research in general, but specifically for the humanities and the social sciences. When we started building the infrastructure, we had an original vision, which was to create a domain, a single domain of language resources and tools available from Europe and beyond, that would be accessible for researchers through a single sign-on online environment. In the meantime, we have learned that more is required to satisfy the users and research, but I still think this original vision is still a powerful one. So CLARION is a mature infrastructure. There are contributions of about 20 national consortia, and it's coordinated by the CLARION ERIC, established in 2012. CLARION's a distributed infrastructure. It's made up out of centers, and the most important centers that form its backbone are what we call the CLARION B centers. These are technical centers. They provide services and resources, and often you see that they are maintained, they're organized by a university or an academic institute that then offer access to resources and services to their own local user base, but through CLARION also to a European-wide one. There are strict criteria to become a CLARION B center. So B center requirements target a stable technical and institutional foundation. We have a center assessment committee that checks applications of organizations for a CLARION B center status. There is technical coordination, including discussing and deciding the center requirements by the center committee. Next to CLARION B centers, there are also CLARION C and K centers, and these are not certified, at least not technically. CLARION C centers are centers that only provide metadata for resources for harvesting, so not the resources themselves. And K centers are knowledge centers. These are organizations that usually specialize in one type of language resources and provide expertise on that. So CLARION centers, we've got quite a few of them, I have to say. There are 24 certified B centers, 20 C centers, and 70 K centers. Sometimes they overlap, so you have B centers or C centers that are also K centers. We're proud to have our centers distributed over 3 continents, so Europe, the US and Africa. Certification, because that's what happened for the B centers, right? Why? Well, from the CLARION's perspective, it's to improve the quality of the center contribution. So we have conditions about management, technical staff, on the implementations, the technical implementations of repository access systems. And we also want the centers to be explicit about the contacts and the communication channels that we can and researchers can use to contact them. There are lots of technical requirements too, so this decreases the interoperability problems because these technical centers form in infrastructure and they have to be interoperable with the coordinating applications. And also, and this is often underestimated, the certification of these centers, which are the national contribution to the CLARION infrastructure, are proving the contributions of the national projects to the EU infrastructure. Next to what I've mentioned, which are how to say, benefits for the CLARION infrastructure, there are also benefits for the centers themselves. I think it's always good if centers try to make their internal processes explicit. And of course, if the service quality for the CLARION users is increased, that means also there is an improved service quality for the local users. CLARION had a center assessment already from its start when we were not working with CTS, but with DSA, Data Seal of Approval, which was the precursor of CTS. Many of you will still remember that. So, B center certification. So we have general requirements where we want to have statements about center mission, the domain that a center thinks it fills, funding, explicit policies. There are technical requirements, mostly about data management, and many of the general requirements can be provided by an external assessment, as for instance is provided by CTS. CTS is not a perfect match for the CLARION requirements, but we think it's definitely worthwhile. Why? Well, it's outsourcing of the testing procedure, so it takes some of the load of the hands of the assessment committee. CTS has a high level of prestige that's offered to the centers and through the centers also to the infrastructures, right? So could say CLARION infrastructures has 20, at least 20 CTA certified centers. CLARION funds the CTS certification, so that's the €1,000 that was already mentioned. And it's important, it has that much of importance to us that we also synchronize our own certificate cycle with that of CTS, so the 3-year cycle. So the B Center assessment procedure also maps important CLARION requirements. And we have, there is a B Center requirement list from which we specifically refer to the questions in the CTS question list. Why don't we leave it just in the hands of the CTS question list? That's because we want to ascertain every time again and again why we think a certain requirement is important for CLARION. And if we would leave it completely within the realm of CTS, we would lose that connection. Here I have got 2 slides with the CLARION B Center requirements, and this is the slide with the general requirements. And as you can see, I will not go through all of them, but as you can see, many of them have a reference to a specific CTS question. And there's a large overlap there, but perhaps it's more interesting to go to the second slide and show what's not covered by CTS and what is important for CLARION. And this mostly has to do with making the centers visible within CLARION. So we have a CLARION center registry, and we require that the centers register in the CLARION center registry. The other thing is that, as I already said, we need interoperability between the centers and the coordinating applications. So we have specific requirements that centers should have an OAI PMH endpoint for metadata harvesting. We have requirements that they should provide not just metadata, but a specific brand of metadata, CMDI, for both the language resources and the language technology. We require that there is a specific content negotiation for the metadata. We require that there are PIDs for resource metadata and resources, and above that we require also a specific brand of PID, so handles or DOIs. We require membership in the CLARION Service Provider Federation and the National Identity Federation, so that we can try to meet that original vision of this single sign-on domain of language resources and technology. And we have security guidelines with a specific requirement for accepted server certificates. Well, we are already working with CTS for quite a few years, and we have made a few observations. This list here is what I've discussed with CLARION Center Assessment Committee. It's don't want to mean that this is supported by CLARION Broad, but at least those who are involved support it. So there is an overlap between CLARION requirements and CTS requirements. So, but it's not a complete one. So CTS focuses on long-term preservation mostly, while CLARION is more about access, and also where the specific technical requirements of CLARION are about. So CTS is vague about domain and center contributions, and CLARION needs explicit statements on resource contributions. In my experience, we had once one center that tried to go for a B center certification, and they just had one resource in the whole holding. And for CLARION, that is not sufficient, but it might have been that they could have passed the CTS certification. And discussing with people that had to do it, they consider often CTS an overkill, especially with respect to process management and role descriptions. For CLARION purposes, a more simple description would suffice. There's currently a current complaint about CTS that it takes about 6 months, and that seems overly long. And it has already been mentioned, OIS. It's not OASIS. The terminology, it's considered difficult by most people that manage CLARION centers. So concluding, I think, and people in the assessment committee think that CTS is very useful, but we have suggestions to enable maybe a partial CTS or a CTS Lite, and also adding more requirements with respect to the access stopping and the certification of services. Many CLARION centers offer lots of services, and it would be good if we could somehow also have a quality assessment of that. And that concludes my contribution.
Yeah, to follow up with the use cases, Cesta is the consortium of European social science data archives. It's an ERIC like CLARION, but slightly differently organized. as I suppose you know, in ERICS, it's the nation, the country that is the member. And in our case, it's the member that sort of selects a unit or something in its country to be the service provider. And that's the way in our case. So we have one service provider for each member country. This makes it quite disparate form of service providers. I mean, they are, some of them are consist only of 2 persons and others are 70 persons. So it's not so easy to have an homogenized level of services. And so Cesta has no saying in who becomes the service provider. So we have to do this harmonization between countries by selecting services for the others that doesn't fulfill the old one. So Cesta started back in 1976 to then simplify data sharing. Of course, in those days it was magnetic tapes and mainframes and printed catalogs and stuff. So it was quite another world then. And then this organizations grew along and became also an ERIC. And we started by being a company in Norway at the first years, but now we are proper ERIC with all the other things. So currently there are 21 members and then 21 repositories, service providers in ERIC, and 10 of them are currently certified with CoreTrustSeal. The Cesta is quite heavily maintained by the main office. So we work the infrastructure via working groups, and currently there are 4 working groups. There's Trust, where we work in the certification thing. There's Training, Technology and Tools and Services. This is text from the homepage saying what we should do. Cesta statutes are quite, they are mandatory things in there for them, and the statute 7 as cited here, that we should adhere to the principles of the OAS reference model and agreed Cesta ERIC requirements for operating trusted repositories. And this is mapped into that. What is meant with this is CoreTrustSeal. So that is mandatory to be a service provider, that we try to maintain this status. But as I said, it's not that easy to get the certification if there's only 2 people working in the repository. So we do try to help each other out in different ways in this what should I call it, this forcing one. We try to talk to the funders of these repositories that they have to put in more money to it to be able to have at least the lowest level of participation. Training groups, it's for both internal with expert seminars and sharing of best practices between service providers, but it's also externally to social scientists as the designated community of Cesta. Technology maintains the backbone of the services that are common to Cesta. We have a common data catalog. We have a social science thesaurus in, I think, 9 or 10 languages. And there's a building of a question data bank and so all sort of things that will help researchers to find what they need in a simplified way. Tools and services is a structured way for service providers to share their best practices and tools, and that's also quite useful in a way to sort of assist or adopt lesser fortunate service providers to help them get a better situation. The trust group, the one we represent in here, is helping and supporting all other service providers with all kind of things. They have questions, they could just send them along. We also sort of guarding how you follow the statutes and the CoreTrustSeal following. So we keep track of every service provider to see where they are in the way of being a trusted digital repository. This is for future engagement or inclusion in the European Open Science Cloud, and there should be sort of a similar way for the services in different countries. So we are building a network of trusted repositories for the future. So we are quite heavily engaged in the European Open Science Cloud evolution. The trust group itself, it consists of today 5 service providers or people from 5, but we also have contacts in every one of the others. So we have a way to communicate new and other things between the service providers that belongs to the trust domain. We achieve our goals by engaging members and more or less poking them with information about what's happening in the certification way and what's needed to comply with what we think is the future requirements both of Cesta and CoreTrustSeal. Monitoring and reviewing is also quite heavy, and I think we have a quarterly report to the main office about maturity levels on where there might be need for extra resources to help service provider to lift into an acceptable standard. We also maintain an overview of the trust landscape, and this is work being done in RDA and other organizations, so to see where we can change and maintain relevant requirements in the CoreTrustSeal environment. We're also working with trying to keep community standards should be a part of CoreTrustSeal in a way that you in some of these requirements as an answer or evidence that you fulfill the requirement that you are a member of Cesta, because we have quite strict regulations in regard of metadata standards and vocabularies and stuff that you shouldn't need to describe that further more than say that you are part of a bigger community that keeps this standard for you. So in detail, regarding CoreTrustSeal, we have individual contacts with all service providers and also those that are aspiring. There are institutions where the nations not yet have become members of Cesta, but if they become members, we know that it's this service provider that will be assigned. We keep feedback and advice to all service providers on things that are trust related. It's not just CoreTrustSeal matters, but there could be fair standards and other things that we consider is trust related as well. We participate in workshops or other Cesta activities if we can, or organize our own workshops in trust related or CoreTrustSeal related questions. These are often hosted by institutions that seek extra support from the CoreTrustSeal group within Cesta. As I said, we're also having monitoring of status of the service providers, if they are actively writing on applications, or if they are doing other things related to the statutes as well. The statutes do have to be changed over time because they are not, I mean, as the world around us evolves, the ERIC have to evolve as well. We're also part in other groups, as I said, RDA, FAIR, Freya, as René mentioned, and there's a lot of other groups and projects that produce output that's relevant for certification or trust matters. And we also follow and have close contact with the certification organizations to let them know where we are standing and what things we might need to improve. And there are some of them that's quite hasty, I think now. It's a certification for technical service providers. There aren't any, as far as I know yet, but it's quite common that you outsource your technical and other activities to someone else, and ideally there should be a way for them also to be certified within their area. So hopefully that will come within the next years. That's what I have to say about the Cesta. Yeah, this is sort of the thing you saw René show, but we have the internal one. The service provider make a self-assessment that goes into the trust group for an internal review. And this could go on for quite some time before they are ready to write the real application for CoreTrustSeal. So we sort of guide them through the process. And I think that's what's needed a lot of them to find the resource enough to write it, because it's this takes resources from other things in the repository, and if they are quite small, it could be too large for them to do it by themselves.